I'm Krista Brady, and today I'll be talking to you about the spinal cord. So we've got this great model here of the nervous system, and here's your spinal cord running all the way from the brainstem all the way down. It does end at the level of about L1 or L2 in an adult. And when I say L1 and L2, I'm referring to the vertebrae. So this is by the first or second lumbar vertebra. It does vary a little bit, but definitely by the end of L2, that spinal cord will terminate, and it terminates in this little cone. So you should be able to see the white coloration here is helping us show where that spinal cord actually ends, and that cone there is called the conus medullaris. The conus medullaris. From the conus medullaris, then you can notice that we have all this whole mess of stuff, all this yellow stuff. These are all the spinal roots of spinal nerves that are waiting to leave the vertebral canal through the intervertebral foramen at the correct level. So this whole mess of stuff, it looks kind of like a horse's tail, and it's called the cauda equina, which literally means horse's tail. Running right through the middle of it, all the way from the tip of that conus medullaris, all the way down until it anchors on the coccyx, is this connective tissue strand called the Phylum Terminale. The Phylum Terminale. So again, it anchors the spinal cord to the coccyx to help keep it in place. Now we're going to zoom in on the spinal cord so we can talk about a few other structures of the spinal cord. Here we're looking at a model of the spinal cord. I'll tilt this up so you can see that more clearly. This is a transverse section of the spinal cord, and you'll notice, of course, that we've got areas of gray matter and white matter, just as we have in the brain. Here, the gray matter will form what looks like an H, or some people like thinking of that as a butterfly, and it's surrounded by white matter on the outside. A few landmarks we'll talk about with the spinal cord. So notice first that we've got this deep indentation here. This is the ventral median fissure, and that is on the ventral or anterior side of the spinal cord. And then on the posterior or dorsal side, we have a smaller fissure, a smaller indentation, and it's much thinner than the ventral median fissure. So this one on the dorsal side is the dorsal median sulcus. So remember, the difference between a fissure and a sulcus is that a fissure is much larger and deeper, so you fall in a fissure, but you just slip in a sulcus. And I'll point these out on this diagram below as well. So we've got that ventral median fissure and the dorsal median sulcus. So those are great landmarks to help you tell anterior from posterior when you're looking at a section of the spinal cord. Now let's focus in on that gray matter. So we've got the butterfly shape here, and we've got this bridge of gray matter that's connecting the two halves. This is the gray commissure. Remember that a commissural tract is one that's connecting right and left halves of part of the nervous system, and that's what the gray commissure does here. And then in the center of the gray commissure, we've got a little hole. I'll point this out on the diagram because it's a little more clear. So that black hole there is representing a cavity that will travel the length of the spinal cord. This is the central canal. The central canal is filled with cerebrospinal fluid, and it connects ultimately at the brain. It connects to the fourth ventricle there in the brain. So moving along with the white and gray matter, so notice that we've got our white matter surrounding the gray matter. And on the sides here, these are the lateral white columns. Then we've got the anterior or ventral white columns and the posterior or dorsal white columns. With the gray matter, we've got these projections or tails coming out. These are the dorsal gray horns, one on either side, and the anterior gray horns here going anteriorly. This is another thing that can help you tell anterior from posterior when you're looking at the spinal cord, because the anterior gray horns are stubbier than the dorsal ones, and they don't reach all the way to the edge of the white matter of the spinal cord. The dorsal gray horns, on the other hand, they are longer and they do typically reach almost all the way to the end, to the edge of the white matter of the spinal cord. Now notice that we've got these structures. These are representing axons of sensory neurons that are coming into the spinal cord, into that dorsal gray horn. And this collection of axons here is called the dorsal root. The dorsal root. And then notice that we've got this swelling here. This is the dorsal root ganglion. Remember that a ganglion is a collection of somas or cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system. And that's what this is. This is a collection of the somas or cell bodies of the unipolar sensory neurons that are carrying sensations into the spinal cord. On the opposite side, you can see that we've got axons coming out of the anterior gray horns here. These axons are collectively called the ventral root. And the ventral root, this is carrying motor commands out to your skeletal muscles. So this is carrying voluntary skeletal muscle commands, voluntary motor information. The ventral root and the dorsal root will come together to form the spinal cord, and then they'll actually split almost immediately into other branches. So you'll typically have a ventral ramus of a spinal nerve, which is coming off to the ventral or anterior side, and a dorsal ramus of a spinal nerve, which is coming off to the dorsal or posterior side. And at that point, those are going to be carrying mixed sensory and motor information. Here we're looking at a chart of the spinal cord, and notice that we've got part of a vertebra here, and so you can see how the vertebra surrounds the spinal cord to help protect it. And here, one thing that we can see here that we did not see on our model is we can see the meninges that surround the spinal cord. So remember that the meninges are these protective connective tissue layers, and the meninges that surround the spinal cord are very similar to the meninges that surround the brain, and they are actually continuous with each other. So this outermost layer is the dura mater, the tough mother, and then you can see this light blue layer right inside that, which is the arachnoid mater, or spider mother. And then we've got this space, the subarachnoid space, that is filled with cerebrospinal fluid. And then right up against the spinal cord here, we would have the pia mater, following every little curve and indentation of that spinal cord. Now, a couple things that are different here about the spinal meninges compared to the brain meninges is that we do have this space between the dura mater and the bone here, and this is the epidural space. And the epidural space outside of the spinal cord contains a lot of fat that's going to help cushion that spinal cord. One other thing is that we've got these connective tissue threads here. These are the denticulate ligaments. The denticulate ligaments, and they're going to anchor the spinal cord side to side. They look a little like floss, and so that term denticulate makes me think of dentists and teeth and floss. So these denticulate ligaments that look like floss. I'll also just point out some of the structures that we've already seen just on this new chart here. So we can see the white and gray matter of the spinal cord, that gray commissure connecting the two halves. We can see the dorsal gray horns and the ventral gray horns. And we can see the dorsal root here with that swelling, the dorsal root ganglion, and the ventral root coming out of the ventral side here. And you can see that they combine together into that spinal nerve, and then we immediately get a branch splitting off. This is the dorsal ramus of a spinal nerve, and here we have the ventral ramus of a spinal nerve continuing ventrally. Today, I've talked to you about the spinal cord. We've talked about the smaller features of the spinal cord as well as some of our macroscopic features. And now go ahead and practice these using the labeled and unlabeled images in your Learning Lab PowerPoint, and then you can apply these on the lab quizzes.